was thinking as you were talking about people being able to get their stuff off the shelf, and thinking about it as we were talking about something this coming week. So my wife and I have started getting, I guess, 4 a week, meals delivered to us from Green Chef. Anybody else done this or similar? So now what this one is a little bit different, because some places they have meals, they deliver them to you and like stick it in the microwave. But not this place. What they do is they send you these meals that you get to choose beforehand, but they send you the box and it has everything self-contained in the box. So the meat, the vegetables, the sides, even down to the seasoning and any type of sauces that are needed are all included in the box. I mean, all the ingredients put together a great meal. Now, we still have to get that instruction sheet and open it up. And we still have to pull the right things out at the right time. And we still have to season the meat with the ingredients they've given us to taste what this place has sent us and prepare it for us. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about how important those ingredients are. Because all times I've pulled up recipes and realize I don't have the ingredients. And it's usually about halfway through cooking it that I don't realize I have all the ingredients. Anybody say amen to that? Experience that at any point in your life, okay? When Finn lived with us, this was Finn's greatest joy, was getting the ingredients out of the cabinet so that we could cook. And I just realized how important those ingredients are. And as I was thinking about this message this week, I was thinking about having the right ingredients. And the right ingredients for something that is going on in the text that we have before us. We're going through the book of Romans. We're in chapter 1, so we just started last week. We're still kind of in the part of the book of Romans of chapter 1 that's the introduction. It's still Paul first told about who he was. We saw that last week with who he was as far as his mindset, his mission, and his message. And now we move into the part where he begins to talk directly to the Romans whom he is writing to. And this word pops up in this text that I think is a theme for which we can latch onto this morning in a way of application. And it is the idea of encouragement. Encouragement. And so when we look at this text, I want us to look at 4 ingredients for encouragement. So 4 ingredients of encouragement, but mind you that we're going to read about what those ingredients are, but unless we take them out of the bag and put them on, then they're not going to serve us very well. So remember that as we begin to go through these. And I'm going to look at verses 8 through 15 of Romans chapter 1, and let me read it, and then we'll come back and see what the ingredients are for encouragement. But you may want to think about that word encouragement as we read through this text and hear Paul's heart for the Romans. He says, first, I want to thank God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all of the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow, by God's will, I may be at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. Another word there could be to encourage you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to Greek and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. So I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. Now, reminder that he writes this book, and normally Paul is writing his letters to churches that he had relationships with. Now, we're going to see at the end of the book that he knew some people that were there in Rome, but he had actually never visited them. In many of the other churches, he started the churches. This one was started by others, and yet he is coming in to have the opportunity to encourage them. And he's doing this as he is likely wanting to go on to Spain. So it's a little bit of a missionary letter, sending them ahead and saying, you know, this is what I teach and this is what I do. And so in this text, though, it's interesting that he is going to point out, and I'll just look at his model more than anything, of these ingredients of encouragement. And the first one is this: gratitude for others. Gratitude for others. Look at what he says. First, I want to thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you. He's thankful for them. Why? Because your faith is proclaimed in all of the world. So here he is in Jerusalem. They are in Rome. They didn't have social media or anything else. And yet the word of their faithfulness had spread to him, even at this point, probably in Corinth. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit, that the gospel of the Son, that I, without ceasing, I mention you in my prayers. This attitude of gratitude for others, Paul wants to thank them and let them know that your faithfulness, your understanding and faithfulness in the gospel is heard throughout the entire world. That gratitude here even flows into prayer, as he says, he consistently prays for them. And I just think these two truths are so absolutely contrary to the way many of us live. So let me give you a test. Where's my phone? I left my phone over there. I was going to do a selfie with us all this morning. But, it's kind of interesting when we do, the family gathers, or you gather with some friends and you do a selfie and then you turn it around. And what does everybody do? Do they look at everybody else in the picture to see if they look good? No. You look at yourself, right? I mean, unless you have kids, little kids, then you're kind of looking, was my kid, what? But normally you're looking at yourself and you're asking the question, how do I look in this photo? And it's interesting that we have at times had photos that I wanted to send out to a lot of people, and there'll be 3 of them there, and we're looking at them, and we got 4 family members, everybody choosing a different picture. And it really evolved around which one they looked best in, right? And sometimes that's the way we kind of live our world, is that we're out in presence of people, but we're kind of asking the question, what do I look like? How do others see me at this moment? And sometimes it's, how do you see yourself at that moment? And that begins to take on your interactions even with other people. And I wonder how many times we would sit back and say, I don't care what I look like in that picture, but man, my wife looks good. I'm going to send this one. Right? Well, here's how you got to think about this. We encourage others when we express genuine gratitude for what God is doing in their lives. Larry Crabb had an interesting insight. He's a psychologist, passed away a few years ago. But he says, people's deepest need is not to be fixed. Now, here's from a psychologist. People's deepest need is not to be fixed, but to be deeply connected. Encouragement comes when 2 believers meet in authenticity and stir up one another's faith. And so when we think about that, here are a couple of questions that we may ask ourselves. Do you know others well enough to know what to be grateful for in their lives? I mean, Paul knew these people by a distance, and the only thing he knew about them was well-deserving of praise. It was their faith and their faithfulness to the Lord Jesus Christ. How many people in your spheres of influence do you actually know well enough to say, I am grateful for what I see in your life? Maybe you need to ask more questions. Maybe for a moment, put aside what is interesting to you and find out what is interesting for them. What is their heartbeat? What are those things that are evident of God's working in their lives? Just slow down long enough to see the good in others. The second thing would be, do you express what you have heard or know about them? Maybe you do see something in their life, and I wonder how many times do you stop and actually express it to them? Or maybe it's what you've heard about them. Maybe you hear others speak about them, and it resonates with you, or you think they should know that people think that. I do a number of opportunities to do things like memorials, and I see BB back there, and it's really much on my mind right now. But, when we stand to do a memorial, we share things about people. And so often we share those things that we deeply appreciated about them. And sometimes I found myself saying, I wish I had told them that while they were still with me. Now, I don't do that to guilt myself, but it reminds me that, yes, that everybody has those things. And sometimes when we sit and we slow down and we think about the beauty of that person's life, at those moments we want to celebrate it. And let's see that we do that while we still have that opportunity to share with them what we see God doing in their life. Another writer has said this: encouragement is more than compliments. I love this. Encouragement is more than compliments. It is calling out the presence of God that you see in others. So it's more than a surface level compliment, but how do I see God evident in working in your life? So encouragement starts with gratitude, thinking about others, what you appreciate and can love about them. And for some of us that's hard. Maybe that's hard because we are high achievers and we are performance oriented, and so it's hard for us to sometimes appreciate when somebody's doing something when our expectations can be sometimes so much more, and it's a time to check that and to pull that back. The second ingredient to encouragement is a longing to be present with others. And maybe we can even say a commitment to be present with others. In verses 10 and 11 of this text, he writes of himself that always in my prayers I have thought about you and prayed for you, asking that somehow by God's will I may now at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to encourage you. So there's this longing to be with people. We can easily be in a culture that is isolated. And we sometimes think about isolated as that monk who goes off into the mountains by himself as a hermit, as being isolated. But one of the hardest isolations is to be with people and still alone. And in this text it says, I long to be with you. Now, we don't know all the reasons that he was prohibited from coming, probably a lot of different issues, but at this point, he was unable to be with them. But even when you're with somebody, the question is, are you present with them? Are you really connecting with them? A number of years ago, I got a phone call. I was pastoring a church. I got a phone call from somebody I had never met. She introduced herself and said that I have something you need to know. And then she begins to tell me about some inappropriate activities that one of our pastors had been having online. Now, there's two things I know about that. One, no man ever wants to hear that about anyone else, but particularly about his pastoral staff. But secondly, I also know that people lie. And so I wasn't sure what I was hearing, truth or not. And so I asked her some more questions. She offered to send me what she had seen and captured online. And so I call my friend and pastor on my staff, and I confronted him on it, to which he denied it. And he said this person has a vendetta against him and has for some 15 years. And so I left not really sure what to believe. But then I get a call the next day from the same young man, and he confessed that he had done that and more. And in that confession, owned up to it, offered his resignation on the pastoral staff, of which I accepted. But I told him, I said, now we get to find out your character. Are you willing to enter into some accountability with me, and let's walk through this together? And thankfully, and to his credit, he did. And as we were meeting in those months afterwards, here's a guy who had been on my staff. I met with him weekly, given his role in the church. And we talked about goals and missions and vision and all those other things. And here we were about 3 or 4 weeks into this post-resignation time when I'm walking with him. And I just said, hey, let me ask you a question. When you were on our staff, was there more that we could have done to meet you where you're at, to you actually have seen this going on? And he stopped and he said something that caught me off guard. He goes, I wish you and I had taken the time that we have taken in these last 3 weeks to just talk about our souls. And I realized I was so focused on getting the job done at the church that I had a pastor on my staff whose soul was withering, and I did not connect with him at that level. Now, does that excuse what he did? Absolutely not. But it reminded me that we can be in people's presence, talk with them regularly, and not know and connect with the level of their soul. And so I would say this idea of longing to be present with others is to be present in the moment with them. Not everything is going to be heavy. Not everything is going to be intense. But being present with others is more than a location. It's about them showing who they are and you showing who you are. And sometimes that's done in quietness, and sometimes it means you just listen to someone else's heart. So be present. Long to be with people. One of the things that I found when I stepped away from my previous church and I was in this time of church planting, that we were kind of isolated from our normal fellowship of believers. And that was fine for about 3 or 4 weeks because we got to visit other churches. We didn't, I knew most of the pastors at those churches, but we got to see what they were doing. But you know what we didn't get is to walk in on Sunday morning and seeing the people we'd invested life with and talk with them and be with them. And we longed to get back into a fellowship where we got up on Sunday morning, not because we had to, but because we longed to be with the fellowship. And I encourage us to move towards that with each other. But that doesn't just mean being present. It means to commit to mutual encouragement. That's what he says in verse 12. I prayed all this. I wanted to be with you. I wanted to strengthen you. In verse 12, that is, that we may mutually encourage each other by each other's faith, both yours and mine. So here was Paul the apostle. Obviously, he had a lot to give, but he also realized I had a lot to receive. I could give to encourage, but I also needed to be encouraged. And there's a danger each of us have. One is that we have certain people that can be overgivers. They can be overgivers. They can give so much of themselves to others that they end up drained, they end up worn out, they always give. And sometimes they need to sit back and say, it's okay for me to receive encouragement, for me to receive something from the body of Christ. And then we have others that are overtakers. That just simply means every time they step into a situation, it's about them. I see it all the time, and we can fall into this in church real easy because we want to go to a church that meets all of our check boxes, right? And even on a Sunday, and the worship team was kind of off today. The preacher, man, he must have been partying all week because that wasn't very good. He didn't give much time to that message. I mean, we grade Sunday morning rather than realizing, I'm there to be encouraged. I hope the songs are uplifting. I hope the messages are encouraging. But my question is, did you encourage anyone from being here this morning? Would anybody have cared if you didn't show up? Or do you actually take a little bit of time? Doesn't take much. Sometimes it's just a smile and a handshake. Sometimes it's a pat on the back. Sometimes because you knew something going on in someone's life, you ask them how that was going. I love that so many of you will do that with me. You'll ask me, hey, how's Finn doing? You'll ask how one of my kids is doing. And as a parent, we all care about our kids, right? And it says that you care something about me. There's a mutual encouragement there. We used to have a family night in our home when our kids were growing up. It ebbed and flowed on our consistency, but when we were in high school, we really felt like we need to do this because everybody's going different directions. And we were like, okay, we got Sunday night, so let's do a family night. And so one of those family nights, I said, I've got an idea. This was a time when they were teenagers. Teenagers are not always known for being encouraging to their siblings. Was that just my experience? That was my experience. And so we sat around that night, and I said, here's what we're going to do tonight. He goes, we're going to go around the circle for each person in the circle, and I want everybody to say at least one thing that you are thankful for about them or a positive thing you see in their life. My oldest son, in his usual quick sense of humor, said, that's going to be hard. It's like, you can do it. And so they all went around, and I was actually stunned by some of the things they said about each other and even about their parents. I was stunned in a positive way. Because although they never took time to say it, they actually saw things in their siblings and their brother and sister that they actually admired. So the next week we get together, my youngest son immediately says, oh, we're going to do that encouragement thing again. And realized that he got so few words of encouragement in his life, he longed for that moment. I wonder how many of us feel the same way. We long for those moments to just hear those words of encouragement. Another writer has said, true community is where we hear the music of the gospel in each other's hearts, and we help one another listen even when the world wants to drown it out? Do you see relationships as a place to give and receive, or only maybe to give or to serve, or maybe only to take? True encouragement is always shared. The fourth ingredient for encouragement, I don't know how to word this one. I found it in these last few verses. I used the term inclusive. I almost was going to say it the other way, because it's probably the other way is more true, and that is it does not exclude. True encouragement doesn't exclude people. And listen to what he says here. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far been offended, in order that I may reap some harvest among you, as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. That is, the Gentiles, those who were non-Jews, most of those living in Rome. I am under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. So I am to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome. So start with this big picture. I'm not coming just to encourage the Jews through whom the Messiah came. I'm also here to encourage the Gentiles in my ministry, even more so, to encourage the Gentiles. But then he uses this idea of, I love the words, both to Greeks and barbarians. You know what that means? In that terminology, that would have been the educated and the uneducated. And depending on what side of the border you live on, the Oklahomans and the Texans. And you can throw that either way you want, depending on your perspective, right? But here it was, people that you would otherwise not consider really worthy of interaction in any substantial way. There were those that were, Greeks, they were well trained, they were educated, and then those that were not. And yet, he comes to minister to all of them. He then uses the term the wise and the foolish. And sometimes you might think, well, I don't know if I want to spend my time encouraging, maybe you don't call them a fool, but for whatever blank that you would use there, that maybe they don't deserve my time, or maybe I just don't even think about them. And what's it like to be that type of values everyone? I had a worship leader. It was actually, he was just being a guest leader. He had actually been on The Voice, and so was obviously we're very gifted. A lot of people knew him. He made all the way to the finals that year, I think. And but he was leading worship for us one Sunday morning. And now he was kind of typical what some of us think about artists and musicians. And I'm going to stereotype right here, man. Holes in the jeans. Kind of ratty shirts. And he sometimes wear a hat. And so he would show up at Bethel Church of Houston, next to the Houston Country Club in the Tanglewood area of Houston. That's where this church was, and he's leading worship. And so he came in, and he had led worship there a few times a year. And so he meets with me before he agrees to come and lead worship, and he goes, "So tell me, how's the church doing now?" And he's fishing for something. And so later he comes and he tells me a story about a lady in the church. And she was a precious lady. I loved her to death. I did her. But he said, she said something to me one time. Her husband had passed away, and she saw me in the fellowship hall, and she pulled me aside with these eyes and wanting to, say something to me. She goes, my husband would have loved you. He felt comfortable in the presence of kings and peasants. And he said, it took me a minute to realize she was calling me a peasant. And, she nothing by that, probably. I don't know, maybe she did, but let me ask you the question, are some people like peasants, and maybe they deserve you in your presence or not? What I was struck with is no matter how she said it, her husband loved all people. It didn't matter whether they were the kings or they were the servants of the kings. He was able to communicate and live with and encourage them. And so I would encourage for us that we learn to value people of all walks of life. I was at a funeral that had a broad spectrum of relationships. It was a huge funeral, and I was seeing people in their coats and ties and suits, senators, representatives, and then I saw people in their work boots and their jeans, and they were all in the same room to honor this individual. And I remember one of the men said something that struck me. He cleaned the warehouse, or one of the many warehouses that this man owned as part of one of his companies. And he said every time he came and showed up at the warehouse, he said, I knew this. He said he valued me. Now, I know he valued what I did for the company, but even more, he valued me. That's what it means to encourage people and not exclude anyone from that encouragement. When the church becomes a place of authentic encouragement, it becomes a compelling light to a world in darkness.